Hi there. Welcome to another presentation of the Globe Sound Healing Conference. Now we have Akira Pena. Hey,
Hi. Hello.
hey, welcome. Akira is a music producer and certified sound practitioner from Los Angeles. Her sound sapience practice demonstrates and educates the powerful benefits of sound through workshops, sound bath performances, guided meditations, original music, and more with those who seek alternative support. Akira received her training from Globe Institute and her bachelor's from Berklee College of Music. What did you study at Berkeley?
Music business
Oh,
with
music business?
music business and producing
Oh, okay. What instrument you play?
the guitar.
Oh, okay. Cool. Cool. Okay. What have you been up to lately?
I have been just getting ready to establish and launch Sound Sapiens, my sound practice, and getting ready for this practice. I'm sorry, this presentation as well. I've been also doing my own research on cymatics with specifically the Clowny plate. And yeah, that's just what I've been up to. Also making music and yeah.
Cool. Okay. So here's the big question. If you had all the money in the world, what would you do to help people on the planet?
I would find a way to educate and give resources to people to help them find a better way, a better alternative to release negative emotions. I think the world nowadays is missing that, and if I could in any way help anyone, I would first bring them to sound healing, and then see if they could go from there. Where else they could find more healing in other alternatives.
Cool. Okay. So what's your presentation on today?
My presentation is on cymatics. It's called Patterns and Cymatics. The reason being is because cymatics is the study of visible sound, but it's really all in the patterns that we have to really pay attention to.
I, so it's really, God, the main thing is it shows how sound effects matter, huh?
Right, right. It explains how vibration creates shape and shape creates vibration.
Mhm. Cool. Okay. I can't wait. Go ahead and begin.
Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so as mentioned, this is patterns and cymatics. Frequencies we should frequently see. And at the bottom, we have a few prominent people in this field, as well as some experiments and some architecture that contains cymatics. So first, I want to start off for people who don't know what cymatics is. I want to play a video so that way everyone can get an idea of what we're going to be talking about.
The film you are about to see has no characters. If you spare a little of your imagination, it is a film to describe to you the effect of cymatic frequencies on matter. everything owes its existence solely and completely to sound.
So I'm going to stop that right there because we'll get into it. But that was a video by Nigel Stanford. Kind of covers a range of cymatics, not all of them, but a good amount. We have the water, the fire, etc. So moving on. And to start off, we can start with Leonardo da Vinci in the late 1400s, who is quoted saying that when a table is struck along diverse lines, the dust on it concentrates in various shapes and hills and small mountains. And then in the late 1500s, we have Galileo, who basically says that when he scrapes a brass plate with an iron chisel, a long row of thin lines parallel to one another at exactly equal distances apart appear. And he also notes that the marks made during shriller tones are closer together, and those made during the lower tones are less so. And I will show you examples of that later, what I mean. Also at the bottom, he says, during the sibilant strokes, I felt the iron tremble in my hand, from which a kind of tenseness ran through me. Okay, so moving on, we are here with Robert Hooke in July of 1680. It's important to note him because it is documented that he was the first one to kind of discover these patterns when he put flour on glass and it vibrated. He excited it somehow, and it was actually another physicist that suggested for him to use a violin bow to vibrate it. And he's quoted saying, every different stroke makes a different sound, so making a different impression upon the flour gives it as many different motions. And then we finally get to Ernst Chladni. This is him. Ernst Florenz Friedrich Chladni. He was a German physicist and musician. He made tremendous contributions to the field of acoustics, and for that he was nicknamed the father of acoustics. And though Robert Hooke was the first one to observe the flour-covered glass, they're credited to Chladni, but many people think they should be called the Hooke-Chladni patterns. And here's an example of what that experiment probably looked like. There's different plates, sizes. This is the flower that you pour on there, the violin bow, you strike it up against its side, and a pattern comes out depending on the frequency. The patterns are made up of nodes and antinodes, and the sound gathers. It'll vibrate away from the antinodes and it'll gather at the nodes to create nodal lines. And so that's what these are here. And the sound helps us to visualize the geometry of the frequencies. There's many different variables to this. It's dependent on intensity, pitch, the substance you use. For example, if you were to use a lighter powder on the plates, you're going to get a different pattern, even with the same frequency, and I will get to that soon. Again, the lower the note, the more loose the pattern, and the higher the note, more complex. Also, you can experiment on different surfaces. We had glass plate, we had metal plate, etc. And also, if there's any issues on the top of the surface, it's going to affect the pattern. Here's an example of Ernst Cloney's work from his book, Discoveries in Theory of Sound. They're very interesting because they occurred naturally. These straight lines, the curved lines, the circles, all that you see just occurs naturally just by vibration. These are the square plates, and here's the circle plates that he used. And here would be a great time to talk about sacred geometry, which a lot of people think it's the blueprint of all form. It is also believed that all natural growth or movement patterns can be traced back to one or more geometric patterns or geometric shapes. I'm sorry. And here are those shapes. So we have the flower of life. And we also need to mention the golden ratio, which in the most simplest terms is when you take the smaller side and let it fall, and then from there you take the small side and you let it fall, and when you put a curve through all of those, it just creates this spiral. Here is the golden ratio in nature. Here's a snail shell. Here's also the cochlea of our ear. Cloney went on a successful European tour to demonstrate the patterns and also showcase several of his instrument inventions. And he also was endorsed by French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, who commissioned the work De Acoustique, which is the discoveries of sound. And then in March 1832, we also have to mention Michael Faraday, because he called these sound figures crispations. I think that's a very interesting word. I kind of like it. But he wanted to get into experimenting with light and electricity, but at that time it wasn't going to happen. So after 6 months of research, he had to stop his experiments. Next, we have Lord Rayleigh, and I'm mentioning him because his work, Theory of Sound, there's a chapter in there called Vibration of Plates, and it is still recognized to this day as a significant contribution to the field. And now we can get to cymatics, where the word came from. It's actually chyma equals wave in Greek, and it was coined by this man here named Hans Jenny. Cymatics is the study of visible sound and vibration, and as you've seen in the video earlier, here's the fire that will create a different type of pattern almost in height, and you have this in water when light and color is added to it. So Hans Jenny publishes research in a book, Cymatics, the study of wave phenomenon, in 2 parts in 1967. And what he did is he studied sound vibrations on fluids, powders, paste with crystal oscillations and the tonoscope. And so the crystal oscillation is the piezoelectric energy is what helped to cause these vibrations on the plate. And here's an example of him doing that. And here is Hans Jenny's video that he published on cymatics.
But everything owes its existence solely and completely to sound. Sound is the factor which holds it together. Sound is the basis of form and shape.
We can also use different shapes of plate. Here we have a triangular plate with a crystal attached to its underside and produce a sonorous figure. We change to a higher note and see a rather more complicated figure. We use sand and lycopodium. The lycopodium moves to the center of the fields and takes up circular shapes. The sand forms the lines. Each material has its own special way of behaving. Lycopodium alone, a sonorous figure, transition to a mobile flowing phase, and back again to the figure. The sonorous figures represent stationary waves, but now we can also observe moving waves. Here the sand is flowing in a current. When the wavelengths are short, these currents produce a rotary effect. Areas become defined in which the particles are actually rotating. Now we produce two notes with frequencies which are so related as to cause a beat. The note seems to throb, and by using the method we have chosen, this phenomenon of beat or interference can be rendered visible. The figure sways to and fro, the figure pulsates. The picture has changed completely. Now we are exciting fluids. Under vibration, a layer of turpentine forms a regular lattice work. In vibrating glycerin, we see continuous waves which form the queerest figures. And yet, the extraordinary things we see here are simply and solely the effect of vibration. Here is a sonorous figure shown in a fluid. There are some wave fields where there was nothing before. Where there was previously sand, now there is nothing to be seen. The dynamic phase has become the static phase. Wave fields which make the vibratory process in the plate indirectly visible.
that it's not all of his video, but it's a good amount to show you what he was really doing, experimenting with cymatics. Here is from his book. When we talked about the lower tones making looser patterns and the higher tones making more complex patterns, this is actually the same pattern, just more details as it goes. As the frequency increases, you can see here this is 1690, and it goes upwards. More details are added. It's just the way it is. Here is a look at how 852 hertz looks on a Clodney plate, a digital one. Here's what the solfeggio frequencies look like from right to left. I'm sorry, left to right. 174, 285, all the way down. This shape is very interesting. You actually see it everywhere, and this everywhere too. Here's more examples. Again, lower tones, higher, more complex. This is a video about lycodium powder. What is interesting about lycodium powder or using different materials other than just sand is that you can actually create different patterns with the same frequency, just different materials. So here, also in Hans Jenny book, he has a plate with sand, and it's the frequency of 1060. And you can see that when he uses the same frequency, but this time with lycodium powder, it shows the opposite effect. So where it was lined out with the sand is now shaded in with the lycodium powder. Here are lycodium powder variables. This is also from his book. As you can see, there's a lot. That's what makes these patterns so special, is that depending on what you use, you will get that specific image depending on your materials, but it varies on everything. The list goes on. So that would put Hans Jenny here on the timeline at 1967. But there's actually some people, two actually, I would like to mention. First, in 1961, we have Mary Desiree Waller. She actually recreated all of Clodney's work and discovered a method of exciting plates using solid carbon dioxide chips. Her book is called Clodney Figures, A Study in Symmetry, and that was published after her death in 1961. It also includes mathematical equations describing the phenomenon, so I think that's really cool. And before her, we have Miss Margaret Watts Hughes, my girl, invention of the iodophone. That's her right there. She actually was, she died in 1907, and Hans Jenny was born in 1904. So the iodophone is what she created. She was an opera singer, and she wanted to study her voice, in other words, and she wanted to find a way to see the effects of it. So she created what she called an iodophone, which is chamber, wooden chamber with a membrane over the top of it. It usually consisted of something rubber or just something elastic. And the patterns that she would get, she named them voice figures. So again, there's a lot of different names here to call these patterns. This is from her book, the Idophone Voice Figures. And she does say that to find ourselves face to face with nature in her almost limitless variety is to study sound. You see it everywhere, and I will show you examples of that. This is what her idophone looked like. This is actually from her book as well. She put her voice through here. It resonated, it vibrated on the membrane, and at the top, these are the shapes that she had, or the voice figures that came out. She also experimented with different sizes of the membrane at the top. Here she used religious songs and other songs to see what it looks like. And so here we have an E and an E and the D and a C. So with her voice hitting a precise frequency, this is what these notes actually look like. And this was done on a 15-inch diameter of a membrane at the top. Here's a video that I won't play all of it. I'll skim through it, but it has a good explanation of what she did.
The image you are looking at is not a photograph or a painting. It is the human voice made visible. You are looking at the voice of Mrs. Margaret Watts Hughes, a lady who was born in Dowlas, Merthyr Tydfil in 1847. At a young age, she showed such skill as a vocalist that her local chapel and other local benefactors would raise funds and pay for her musical education. She would eventually go and study music at the Royal College of London. She was absorbed into the history of music, and not only the history, but the science behind it. She was a staunchly religious woman, and she believed that the power of music was something that science and the world is not yet fully realised. So she did her own scientific experimentations around music. She looked at the work that scientists and philosophers before her had produced, and noticed, like them, sound was able to create geometric shapes in different ways. But the one thing no one had fully realised is that the one musical instrument that every human being has, their voice, was not yet experimented on in the same way. What did the vibrations of the human voice create? What would it look like to visualise them? So she set about, in the late 1870s and 1880s, mapping what the human voice looked like. She invented an instrument called an idophone, which she would sing through. The voice would be transferred through the idophone, and upon the other end would be placed a glass or ceramic plate covered in a fine paste paint. There, the vibrations of the human voice would leave their imprint and make the human voice visible. Margaret Watts Hughes called these creations voice figures. For many people, they were astounded at how the human voice seem to create shapes that exist in the natural world, flowers, ferns and trees. The collection that you see in now is unique. Margaret mapped out the human voice. She would sing different keys and chords and capture what each one looked like, and then capture what a combination of keys and tones and notes looked like when sung through her instrument, the idophone, and captured onto glass or ceramic. She was also the first woman to display a scientific instrument of her creation and scientific findings at the Royal Society. Aside from her scientific endeavours in the world of music, she also opened several orphanages in London, and over a period of 30-odd years, until her death in 1907, changed the lives of literally hundreds of homeless children on the London streets.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it right here. So she basically says that not any sound is going to make a pattern on the idophone. You have to know how to make the sounds idophone. So it's a instrument and a visual instrument at the same time. And it's funny because the idophone looks a lot like the tonoscope. The tonoscope was used by Hans Jenny And to demonstrate that as well, I'm going to play parts of this video.
So now, what happens when we have a gong bath? Well, the vibrations pass through our body, organs, different bones. Phonoscope. Now this is a water main with a 45-degree angle attached to a single piece of rainwater pipe, which my lovely daughter Eleanor is holding. And what's going to happen is she's going to tone or make a single note down the tube, and we're going to look at the vibrations as they occur through the membrane at the top, and hopefully something quite miraculous and beautiful as well. Take it away. So what happens is the higher the note, the more intricate the pattern.
Which we have already learned. With the iDophone, Miss Margaret Watts Hughes, she wanted to see how singers could utilize that to see the different patterns that singers can make. She expressed that it took a skillful singer to be able to do something like that. So she was looking forward to one day someone picking up that experiment. Jenny actually proposed to use the tonoscope to help the deaf hear, at least understand how to make vowel shapes by completing the pattern. He thought that if they saw the pattern taking shape, it would help them understand what to do to complete it, and in some way either help them learn how to speak or possibly just sing. So now we move on to Alex Lauterwasser, and here's where everything just starts to kind of come together. This is him right here. So he was a German, he is a German researcher and photographer. He's still alive. He published a book, Water Sound Images, in 2022, and it's the cymatic imagery. But what was interesting about him is he actually grew up on a turtle farm, and he was reminded when he was doing his own cymatic experiments that some of the patterns reminded him of the back of the turtle shells. And so here are 4 different frequencies that show similarities to the back of a turtle shell. He also felt that he found the patterns of a leopard, and it's unclear which frequency that is. And also, since we're talking about nature, this is from the iDophone. These are patterns created with just the voice, and the sound spread out, and it looks like roots, branches, foliage, and plants. This is from Margaret's book. She also made trees, and I want to point out to people that this is not a painting. This is not handwritten at all. This was all done by vibration. And she actually states that the trees are some of the harder patterns to make, but they can be made. She also was able to create flowers. Here is the daisy. She put a plaster of kind of like a plaster mixture in the middle heap of it, and she actually explains that the sensation of blowing the flowers is a sensation she's never felt like before, because in some way the plaster felt like it kind of levitated a bit before it popped open. It burst open, and it burst open in even petals, and so she called it the daisy. Here's a petunia, and I think she also stated that other flowers, she was also able to create other flowers as well. When we have things that flow and may not seem like it comes from vibration, well, this is actually called chemical periodicity. This is what Hans Jenny also studied. And he basically says that everywhere there's a tendency towards a rhythmic process. So even if something is just flowing out, it's doing so in a rhythm. The Lysigong rings is a good example to demonstrate that. Is also what he used to describe this phenomenon. And dehiscence, which in biology, it's the release of materials by the splitting open of an organ or tissue. And in botany, it's the natural bursting of open capsules, fruits, anthers, etc. And here's an example of that. So he basically also gets a plaster and liquid, and he puts it together, vibration, and he finds some zebra patterns. But he just says that it must be imagined that everywhere Everything is not only flowing, but actually flowing in patterns and rhythm. So it doesn't matter if it doesn't have a precise geometric shape like we've seen before with the cloudy patterns, or a very nice with the cymoscope, that's the picture that comes out in the water. It can just be flowing. It could be trees. It could be branches. It could be anything. All of those patterns are cymatic patterns. So if we are always constantly seeing frequencies, it's not frequencies we should frequently see. It's frequencies we frequently see, or frequencies we frequency. And they have different names: sonorous figures, crispations, voice figures, clowny patterns, and more. But in the end, they're all just patterns. And now we're going to get into world cymatics. We'll start with cathedrals. We've all know about the rose-colored windows and across the world in different cathedrals. Here are the piano notes with the cymoscope. And you can see that they look like they match. It makes you wonder why they built these into the cathedrals. What was the meaning behind it? What was the purpose? What did they know that we didn't know? This is the Notre Dame Cathedral. And here's what the inside of that looks like, which looks a lot like a cymatic pattern. Here's the St. Patrick's Cathedral, New York, and I actually found this one to be very interesting. I saw this one in person. They have a lot of cymatic patterns all around the building, and the old cathedral also had cymatic patterns on there. And if you can see, that very simple shape that is probably produced by a lower tone is also there. So they tore it down and remodeled, and this is what came from it. And here are some of my videos when I was there. There's just so many outside, lined up everywhere. Here's an inside view of that. And here's another short clip. And as many know, the cathedrals produce good sound. The choir sounds great in there. The organ sounds great in there. Why would they have cymatic patterns on there? It just all makes sense. It's not just in cathedrals. There are mosques as well. This one is in Turkey. It's the, I don't want to say this wrong, the Selimai Mosque. This is the dome, the top view. But when you look at it, you can see the pattern of cymatics clearly all around with the middle. This one's in Turkey. This one is in Pakistan. And if you look up on the dome, you can also see more cymatic patterns. All built in different times, different centuries too. So to scoot Alex Lauterwasser over, we've got to make room for Robert Bowerman. That's this guy right here. And you can't really find a lot of information about him. He's very interesting. He actually studied crop circles and cymatics when he discovered a crop circle near his home in the Netherlands. So from 2000 to 2025, he went around looking for crop circles and tried to study them to see how they were produced and if they were possibly produced with sound. And so here's from his video. Here's what he found when he vibrated water. And he noticed that it was very similar to this crop circle that he investigated. He concluded that these must be made with microwaves, which are not audible. Crop circles also contain sacred geometry. And that leads us to where are we now? Well, right now we have the cymoscope. And that is with John Stuart Reid. I scooted him over because he actually did a little bit more work in the 90s before Robert Bowerman. And that's him right here. So his work in the Great Pyramid actually inspired him to develop the cymoscope, which is an instrument that makes sound visible by imprinting sound vibrations onto water. And here is this is from his website. He says, vibration underpins all matter in the universe. The cymoscope is the first scientific instrument that can provide an analog image of sound and vibration. The once invisible world of sound is revealed in a myriad of geometric patterns in a cymoglyph, which again is another term for cymatics. Not cymatics, but for the patterns. And here's his website. There's a lot of cool things in here. I learned a lot from his website alone. I highly recommend for you to check it out. Here we have all the research topics, which we already covered, that it takes a lot of different fields to put together to understand cymatics. It draws upon everything. I mean, everything's vibration, so it makes sense. He said that when we speak, we actually don't speak in sound waves like this. He says that we actually speak like this. The sound waves come out in a bubble. And so as we speak, there's just bubbles flying around everywhere. He did this video with a choir singing and the organ, and it's actually very interesting. When the choir was singing and we saw it note by note what it looked like, it reminds me of Margaret's experiment with the idlephone. So we can get these patterns with your voice through water with the idlephone. And as you saw, they are different patterns.
And here's some of the latest glyphs that he's created
Oh,
from
wow.
that were created on the Cymoscope of different, I don't know what frequencies they are, but they almost look 3D, right?
Right. Yeah, they're amazing. That one looks like the top of the temple.
Cool.
Dynamic DNA cymatics, we have right here we have the human voice. And if you look at the vowels, we also see that in the architecture, which we've covered, different civilizations, different time periods. And what's interesting is that that can be the same said for the DNA, the helix. This is a top-down view. And if you were to grab it from the top and pick it up, that would create the DNA strands. It makes us feel that maybe we are, just all nothing but sound, which, I mean, we are. But even our DNA is a cymatic pattern. So that leads us to the research part. In Hans Jenny's book, he says that a small group of basic experiments shows that there's an extensive field for research. And that is true because cymatics must be thought of as small details of larger pictures of patterns to identify. Sound is happening all around us with varied effects, which means the pattern effect you get is only a detail to your specific method. Depends on the frequency, on the intensity, on the materials used, all of that. The patterns are going to come out differently, but you will get a pattern. So I've been trying to establish a timeline to basically establish where this field's cymatics came from, with the name coming from Hans Jenny. But this timeline should actually be a lifetime. We've been seeing cymatics for a lifetime. Since the point of creation, since sound, we came from sound. Thank you. And that is from my practice, Sound Sapiens. And here is a special offer. I created a more in-depth dive into this field. It's extensive. There was so much that I couldn't cover in the 60-minute presentation. And it goes for $29.99, but I have it for $19.99 as a special price with the seminar. And the topics include what sound frequencies are, crystal oscillators, the construction of the clotting plate and the idlephone, more on flower cymatics and how she was able to produce them, sonic geometry and what that really means, sonic architecture, more cymoscope experiments, also Egyptian pyramid cymatics, Taurus cymatics, more on DNA cymatics, and more resources. Everything is a clickable link that will take you straight to the source and will allow you to dive deeper if you wish to. And this will be launching with the sound bath that you heard before this presentation. It is called Now I Awake. It is a gratitude sound bath, and this will be available on my website November 1st, soundsapiens.com. You can just enter your email and get a free download PDF for it's just a little mini workshop just to help you out with gratitude if you're stuck on it. This is also coming out for November, which we have Thanksgiving coming up, and the time that we should be giving the most thanks and gratitude for everything that we have in our lives. And that is the end.
Well, thank you. It was so well put together and gave us such a good overview of not only just the field, but just how expansive it is, where it ties into architecture and all vibration. I mean, it's like, this is the way God created every pattern in the universe.
Yes. A lot of people can say that sound is almost like a code, and the display is what we see. It creates vibration, creates matter, and so we see a solid world, but in reality, it's just sound. It's frequency everywhere.
Yeah, vibration. Cool. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.